Namaste. I actually always put off thinking about what I'm going to say. But I don't really feel like starting now. I love these demotivational posters. My favorite is one that's where the Titanic is sinking, and it says failure. And then under it says, no matter how badly things go, you can always serve as a bad example for someone else. And this is so true. Hard work pays off after time, but laziness always pays off now. Huh?
My favorite, never put off the tomorrow what you can do the day after.
That's right. Or when I put this on Meetup, the whole thing wouldn't fit, so I just called it procrastination in here. But I had the thing about, what's the Procrastinators Association newsletter. It's called last month's newsletter. And whenever you bring it up, in fact, somebody sent me a message this morning and said, asked what I was talking about today, and I said procrastination. And she said, oh, I'm the queen of that. But I don't think I've ever met somebody where I've said procrastination, and they said, oh, never. Never. And I think that popularly, we attribute procrastination to laziness. And that's kind of sort of why I chose that first reading, even though I don't really agree with it entirely. Because I don't believe that laziness exists. I think it's a label we put on certain behaviors. And we say that person isn't doing what we think they ought to be doing because they're lazy, because they're inherently defective. They just don't have the motivation. But there's a reason they don't have the motivation. I've long believed, actually, that you could put a human being on a couch, and until the human being had a need to come up that generated some discomfort, formerly we'd say anxiety, but we'll just call it a need, they're going to stay on that couch. Now, sooner or later, they're going to get thirsty, and they're going to get up and go get something to drink. Sooner or later, they're going to have to use the bathroom, and they're going to get up and go use the bathroom. Hopefully. Get up and go use the bathroom. Remember Dirty Rotten Scoundrels with Steve Martin and Michael Caine?
Oh yeah.
And they were con men, and Steve Martin was pretending to be Michael Caine's younger disabled brother. And they're sitting at the dinner table, and Steve Martin says, "Excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom." And Michael Caine says, "Okay," and Steve Martin just goes. So, that would be the exception. So, I believe what we call procrastination is really a conflict of needs. If there's something I need to get done today, and I know I need to get it done today, and I don't do it, there's a reason. It's not that I just don't care. It's that doing it is causing me would cause me more discomfort than not doing it. And we have to look at, if we want to understand why that happens, and what that thing is, what it is about doing it that intimidates me. Think about, here's a common one. I need a raise. I should go talk to my boss about the raise. My boss is a jerk. My boss isn't going to hear me probably anyway. And then I'm just going to bring myself up into my boss's line of sight, which is all my boss ever pays attention to, is whatever what's right in front of my boss. And so even though I need a raise and I need more money, asking my boss for the raise is probably going to quite possibly backfire. So I'll wait. Now, it seems like you're procrastinating, but what you're you're really doing is just weighing the possibilities. Now, of course, you could be wrong about the possibilities, and then you're waiting for nothing. But it's not just like, well, I could ask my boss for a raise. It would probably go really well, but it's a lot of work. That would be laziness. You know, that sitting on the couch and going, geez, I really have to go to the bathroom, but that's a lot of work. That would be laziness. Procrastination is something else. Some people believe that procrastination is a great way for people who feel like there's not very much in their life that they're in control of to take control of their schedule. So I could do this today. I have a paper due next week, Monday. Let's just say. I could write it tomorrow because I don't have anything else to do. But I'd rather write it Sunday night, right?
Pretty much.
I perform better under pressure. Is that what it is? Or is it really, and I believe it's the second thing, it's people trying to take control of their schedule. And people come around and say, you should do this right away. And we say, oh yeah? Watch me. And we get into those standoffs. And I want to say there's nothing wrong with that. Because if you're still getting it done, who is suffering for the procrastination? Nobody but you. And you may not even be suffering. If procrastination really made us suffer, we'd stop doing it. It has to be serving a function. And so we come to the explaining I have to do about this reading. I kind of loved the let's call fire down on them. That was, it's an allusion to the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel with Elijah. And they had a challenge, the prophets and Elijah. Let's see who's legitimate. We're going to put stuff on the altar and we're going to ask God to call down, or send down fire and consume our sacrifice on the altar. And the prophets of Baal engaged in a lengthy period of liturgical dance. And nothing happened. And when Elijah, the short version is Elijah said, God, smoke this stuff. God did. And the prophets of Baal all perished as well. So who are the Samaritans? The Samaritans are half-breeds, to use an old term. They're the product of Jewish people mingling with those dirty Gentiles. And we all know how those dirty Gentiles are, because we all are them. And when Jewish people mingled with dirty Gentiles, married them and reproduced them with them, results were half Gentile, half Jewish children. They were not ritually pure. They could not be ritually pure. They were not welcome in Jerusalem. This would be kind of like, to use an analogy, if somebody came through your town, and let's just pretend for a minute that all of us are people of color. And he seemed like an okay guy, and then he said, I'm headed to the Klan meeting. No matter how nice a guy he seemed to be, our opinions would probably change a little bit. And we'd certainly say, well, if you're going to go there, we don't want much to do with you. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, where none of these people are permitted to go. In fact, they had to set up their own alternate Jerusalem, which also ticked off the people in Jerusalem. And so they were caught in this no-win. And the attitude that your average Jewish person had towards Samaritans is kind of reflected in this idea, hey, Jesus, should we call down fire to just smoke these heathens? Let's just dust them. And, you know, Jesus speaks to them sternly and says, that shit doesn't work. That was Midrash. Oh, no, that's not. But Jesus speaks to them sternly, and he says something that in a not non-agricultural so much, as we are, when we do our agriculture, we got big machines. Okay? And so it sounds kind of like maybe this reading, he's complaining about procrastination, or procrastinating prostitutes, who knows? And he says, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for God's kingdom. And we all say, oh, see, this is about procrastination. You're supposed to get to it. You know, when you decide that you're going to live this spiritual life, you need to get to it. Except that, they didn't have John Deere or refurbished Ellis Chalmers tractors back in the day and plows. They had an ox that had a plow behind it, and they kind of rode on the plow. And the better analogy for us today might be to think about somebody driving fast on the freeway. So you're sailing down the freeway. The truth is, nobody who looks back is going to do well for very long because they're not going to maintain that line. That was the problem with the plow. If you've got a plow and an ox and you've got reins on the ox and you're riding on the plow, you have to look at the point that you're headed toward and keep that plow, that ox rather, headed toward that point. And if you look back, now instead of having nice straight rows, you've got this sort of thing. It's about persistence. It's about what Buddhists might call single-pointedness. It's about, to borrow a phrase from the civil rights movement, keeping your eyes on the prize. It's not about speed. It's about persistence. It's not about, or it is rather, about avoiding distraction and maintaining concentration. Not perfectly. Because after all, the guy with the ox could stop the ox and take a break. When his need to use the bathroom exceeded his need to keep plowing, he could stop. And so we get into these places where we start to think that it's all about, gotta do it right now. We're in such a rush as a culture. You know, I mean, it's just amazing. People go to relax, they go on vacation. And we gotta drive fast to get there because we gotta start relaxing, damn it, just as soon as possible. And then they get up there and they pack their vacation full of stuff because this will be relaxing. And they come home and go back to work to recover from their vacation. I think we should start to see procrastination as, at very worst, just neutral. A time management strategy that's neither good nor bad. And recognize that if we're managing our time appropriately, we're also taking time to rest. Because resting pays off right away. And then loosely hold this idea that we should know where we are. T.O. Rondo, Thomas O. Rondo, was my Asian studies teacher in high school. And I took every course he taught. He was great. He always said at the beginning of class, we need to know where we are. But to know where we are, we need to know where we've been. And once we know where we've been and where we are, we need to know where we're going. That's not looking back once you're on the plow. It's not supposed to make us feel all this external pressure, which, by the way, amplifies procrastination. It's supposed to be more of a gentle guide. And if we take it as a gentle guide and take the pressure off ourselves, we'll start to realize that it's okay to relax. Because when it comes to the spiritual life, the point isn't the destination. As St. Aerosmith said, life's a journey, not a destination. Amen. Sweet motion.